I'd like to again welcome you to the guest lecture sponsored by the docents of the San Diego Museum of Art. Our museum is located in Balboa Park on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation, the original people of the San Diego region. My name is David Miles. I'm a docent and chair of this year's guest lecture series. And I really want to thank you for joining us today. Let's see, I'm going to do this. Great. Should have done this earlier. Let's see. I really want to thank you for joining us today. It's your support through participation and contributions of your time, talent, and treasure that make our community events like this really possible. The guest lecture series is hosted by the San Diego Museum of Art's Docent Council. We are just one program. This guest lecture series is just one program in our work as docents to champion learning, nurture empathy within our diverse communities through exploration and conversations about art, and foster a museum experience that's welcoming and inclusive. And this, I think, really sums up what the guest lecture program is all about. Briefly, I want to thank some specific friends and colleagues who really helped us plan and execute these events. The museum staff who broaden our outreach through electronic and social media, Dr. James Grebel, the educator, mentor, and guide for our docents at the museum, and our docent community of nearly 100 members, volunteers. But specifically, I'd like to thank Bea Barraza, who's chair of the Docent Council, for her leadership and help with the series this year, and Mary Grillo, who's sort of my partner in planning and execution of the series, the guest lecture series this year. This today is our last in the series for 2022, and it's featured a number of artists and museum curators and other, a number of artists and community members and who've really helped us expand our vision of the world, our communities, our museum, and ourselves. And I'm just sharing here a slide with an overview of the speakers we've had this year, who've spoken about environmental issues, using, for instance, Dia de los Muertos to unite a community and a museum, conversations with artists and curators like with Ala Abtekar and Ladan Akbarnia, artists talking about their work, Alison Saar, contemporary artists who's really compelling, artists, people who've used arts for social justice work, like Barbara Mumbi Huerta. We had a panel discussion with artist Fernando Casasempere, whose work is currently on exhibition at the museum called Terra. Lisa Farrington spoke last month with a compelling talk about the world before racism. And of course, right now, today, we have the Larry Baza Memorial Lecture by Gail Goldman, titled Art in the Public Realm. I want to just say a little about today's lecture in particular, and what makes this particularly special. It honors the memory and work of Larry Baza, who is a true warrior for the arts, for artists, and for social justice, who we lost during the COVID-19 pandemic. Larry was actually born in Balboa Park at the Naval Hospital, the old Naval Hospital. So there's a tie right there to the arts in our museum. For years, Larry and his husband, Tom Knoll, who's with us today, owned an art gallery just down the road from the museum in Little Italy that promoted local artists such as Marianela de la Hoz, who's also here, Perry Vasquez, who's also here. Marianela was our first guest lecture, gave our first lecture last June that was dedicated to Larry's memory. And just a couple of comments again about Larry. He was such an advocate for the arts through his service on the San Diego Commission for the Arts and the California Arts Council. But he also dedicated his time and talent towards making San Diego a more inclusive and just community with works with social justice organizations such as the LGBTQ+ Center in Hillcrest and San Diego Pride, among others. And so it's appropriate that the San Diego Museum of Art and the Docent Council honor Larry's life and legacy during June, sort of Pride Month. Okay, great. And our speaker today is Gail Goldman. And for this second lecture, it's really a pleasure to introduce you, Gail. She's in many ways the perfect guest to talk about public art. She's been engaged with this for decades, bringing public art to communities throughout North America, working on policy, planning, development, implementation of projects, both nationally throughout the state and certainly locally. Her successes have come through the understanding of the needs of the many constituents and stakeholders in these kinds of projects. Gail met Larry about 30 years ago, as I understand it, when she first arrived in San Diego as the founding director of San Diego's Public Arts Program. And her work with institutions around the country, from New York, National Endowment for the Arts, just about every arts commission I think that you could probably think about, really puts her in a wonderful position to give this talk today called Public Art in the Public Realm. So Gail, I'm going to stop. I'm going to move myself out of here and welcome you to speak with us today.
Okay, I am going to share my screen. Is that visible to everyone?
Not yet, Gail.
Not yet. Well, let's try again. Okie dokie. Oh, I think perhaps what I was doing, there we go. I was sharing your screen, David.
Whoops.
Okay, we're good to go?
Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction. It's an understatement to say that it's really an honor and a privilege to be the guest lecturer for this tribute to my friend Larry Baza. I know this is something that we will say over and over again, but you know, Larry had such a passion for the arts, and he was a true champion of public art. And we worked and played together from the moment that I moved here and had the great pleasure to meet him. There was so much that Larry cared about and so much that he did, and he was motivated, you know, really by his uncompromising commitment to justice and humanity. I was really drawn to Larry's understated ways. He was subtle, but remarkably effective. He could be outraged one minute and giggling the next. My daughter was really politically active in high school, and Larry was influential as a mentor and educator who she will also always remember. Larry was always caring, he was always there, and I can say without hesitation that I am a better person for having known Larry. I knew I wouldn't get through this. And also San Diego is definitely a better place because he lived here. Let me, why is this? Okay. These are, you know, this is Larry clearly in all his glory, comfortable every single place where he was. He always made people feel important and valued. And one of the artists who many of you undoubtedly know is Bhavna Mehta, who wrote this tribute to him that I'm actually going to read aloud, if you will indulge me, because I think it's something important to hear rather than read. Larry Baza was a profoundly humanizing presence in the art community of San Diego. For several decades, Larry championed numerous artists. He encouraged us to persevere. He was enthusiastic about our work. He delighted in our success. He showed up for events, exhibitions, panels, celebrations. He was tireless about contributing to the idea that art and community are essential for a vibrant society. Deep within the heartbreak of the loss of this gentle giant, we find strength in the constancy of his advocacy, in the wide breadth of his influence. I am fortunate to be one of the many beneficiaries of Larry's radiance. He recognized in me a potential for growth and confidence before I saw it in myself. He challenged me when I most needed it, and he was generous in his continued interest in what I was doing. Larry exemplified a keen sense of pride in his own work, and he did it with a certain verve. A special thrill emanated from him when he was among artists. It was enough to have been in his orbit. He taught me that blending joy and hard work can be sustained, and for that, I will always be grateful. It seems apt to begin with an artwork that was recently installed at the new probation center in North Park. Perry Vasquez, who is with us today, was selected for this commission. As most of you know, he is a very fine artist, and this was his first foray into public art. I was thrilled when he was selected and commissioned to create 2 original paintings. Those paintings were then digitally photographed and reproduced at a much larger scale for placement in the entry lobby and waiting room. When Perry began, one painting, which was to welcome people, which is what you're looking at right now, Sunflower, was intended to be a somewhat generic representation of the community. And he began this effort and developed this idea a couple of years ago. In the interim, we all experienced the pandemic, and as he was putting the finishing touches on this painting, needless to say, it was incredibly gratifying to see that among the folks who are there are a few recognizable personalities, and Larry is among them. And you can see Larry in the right-hand side of the painting. Perry was inspired by conversations with members of the justice-involved community who had been through experience in prison and had come out with incredible passion and commitment to the community in which they were members. Those 6 people literally influenced Perry in his development of these 2 paintings. This one is called Moonflower, and you can see there are 19 somewhat familiar, many familiar, and some maybe unfamiliar faces of people who were acknowledged by these 6 members of the community as providing some real inspiration. In the toward the left, at the lower left, you can see the 6 people who actually did contribute, and they are here as their own heroes and people who will have, in fact, made a difference in their lives and the lives of the people they are now involved with. And that is a very, Perry's interaction with these people and the experience that they had is something that really defines public art, because it is something that really is specific to the location in which it sits. I want to take a minute to kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, because it really was pivotal in the evolution of public art as we know it now. And what I hope to do in the next 45 minutes is really give you a sample of a really broad range of approaches to public art. And for every example I show, there are hundreds of others. So my intent is to really highlight the work that I'm showing you so that you really have a context in which you can consider what you're seeing. And in the end, I hope that each of you will walk away with a better understanding of public art and an even greater appreciation for the myriad of ways that artists really do contribute to our experience of the places that we live and work and in which we breathe. This is an interesting story that starts with Maya Lin having been selected as an undergraduate student at Yale from among 1,400 competitors for the design of this memorial. There were veterans groups that had formed and were actually really insulted by this design, and they protested against it. They felt that Maya Lin, as a student and Chinese American, was not going to be the thoughtful choice. They were opposed to the fact that this was underground. Essentially, they felt that the government was burying the Vietnam War, and called it a black stone sarcophagus. They also had issues with the fact that the names were listed in chronological order of death as opposed to alphabetical. So they rallied the Commission on Fine Arts to change the design, and the commission opted for compromise, which was to retain Maya Lin's design, but to go ahead and commission Frederick Hart to realize three-dimensional representational bronze of 3 soldiers. When the wall and site were open to the public, the response was unprecedented. This actually is the first memorial and major public artwork that invited people to interact with it, as opposed to standing from a distance and observing it. And the outcome is remarkable. People began leaving artifacts and notes and memorabilia, and the veterans who had protested so strongly started collecting those and storing them for a future museum. In addition, by the time that the three-dimensional artwork was available was ready for installation, the committee rallied the powers that be to relocate it from its original site, which was at the very apex of the 2 walls, to a place that was quite a distance away, so that it would not, in fact, interfere with the integrity of the wall or the very personal experience that people had. So in the field of public art, there was a great lesson learned that although there is value to three-dimensional sculpture that is standalone, there was even greater meaning if there could be something in which people could interact. So I'm going to go through these with a little bit of a story, but I will probably just focus on the highlights. This, as many of you know, is the Anish Kapoor major sculpture that's in Millennium Park. It is huge, needless to say. It's 33 feet high and 42 feet wide, 66 feet long, and it weighs 110 tons. What makes this a particularly significant and interactive artwork is that the very highly polished steel surface reflects not only the skyline, which tells you where you are, but also everyone who is, spending time with it. There's a 12-foot arch that invites you in, and people are always amazed and enchanted by the experience that they have. This is yet another way in which artists, pay homage and really celebrate the art that is there. This is called Luminous Field, and it is, really capitalizes on the sculpture's reflective qualities, and it uses an array of projectors, and everything is set to music, and there are dance performances that also accompany it. This is in Calgary. Private developers, as well as public sector, from around the 1960s throughout these decades have what is referred to as a percent for art ordinance. The city ordinances range from, or municipal ordinances range from 0.5% to 2%. In the private sector, it's, the average is 0.5% to 1%. This is a private development, and San Diego actually has both, which is significant. This is called Wonderland. Plancza created this 39-foot high, kind of open, woven head of a young girl in Spain. And if you look closely, you can see that there is an open doorway so that people can actually walk inside and have the same or similar perspective that this young woman has of the cityscape. Art also does not need to be on the ground. This is a very large suspended permanent piece in Phoenix in the downtown area. It is in the Civic Center Park. It is also quite large. It's 140 feet tall and 100 feet wide. It is actually made out of hand batting and machine loom knotting that is that she learned and employed people who are fishermen and women to create. And needless to say, it's really become a major icon in the community. This is a project that is it's at the Denver Convention Center. And this enormous bear is 40 feet high, and it's got 4,000 concrete polymer interlocking triangles. And it is, of course, reminiscent of a big black bear coming down from the Rocky Mountains to peer inside and plant itself in the urban core. So again, it is something that, really is whimsical, it's iconic, and it is, inviting. Obelisks are an important part of our history, and this has been interpreted as a 60-foot high sculpture that is actually made completely recycled bicycle parts. The artist, okay, I'm hearing some ambient sound here. The artist went to bike shops and individuals who donated bicycles that could not be repaired. This is, I love this. This is called Non-Sign. It is actually on the Canadian border in Blaine, Washington. And it is the same dimensions of a regular billboard. It has, unlike billboards, rather than blocking your view of the landscape, it opens it up and invites you to consider what is beyond. This is also, this is a private commission at the International Wilshire Grand Hotel in LA, done by Doho Su. It is pretty remarkable. It actually wraps around 3 walls and up the escalator. It is made of 86,000 individually cast resin figures, and Doho worked closely with the client and all the people that are represented in this artwork. So it was done by 3D modeling. And again, it has a huge impact clearly on the experience that people have in that location. And certainly most of you are familiar with the Stewart collection and Alexis Smith's Snake Path. When I first moved to San Diego, I, of course, was a huge fan of what Mary Beebe was doing with the Stewart collection. And as soon as I got here, I And since that time, I've always been what I call a Mary Beebe wannabe. She really created an incredible environment and in a very visionary and progressive way. And I think you know that this is the pathway up to the Geisel Library. It's actually 560 feet long and 10 feet wide. It's made out of colored slate. And as it moves, as you move up the pathway of the snake, you have the opportunity to stop along the way in the Garden of Eden and to rest where there is this monumental granite book with a quote from Milton's Paradise Lost. This is another form of an earthwork by Peter Fink, who's with us this morning. He is based in London. And this was a landfill site for the debris from demolished buildings being demolished throughout the city. What's remarkable about this is that it is, multiple acres, and he was able to convert it from essentially a useless land site to something that has become enormously popular. These berms form a sort of a visual and auditory screen to the highway that's adjacent to it. It is planted with flower seeds and grasses that have created an amazing habitat for animals that previously were not welcome in that environment. And it has a lot of calming and tranquil areas, as well as active and recreational areas. Water is a big part of this development. There are fishing lakes and boating lakes and wildlife ponds and wetlands. So it is quite, a remarkable transformation that is the result of the vision of an artist. This is in the San Jose International Airport. It is called Space Observers, and it's based on, the surveillance to which we have or are attempting to become familiar with. It is 26 feet high, on a tripod that has 8 feet high legs. And what's really kind of fun about it is that it really does use surveillance technology, so that when you come up the escalator or you're walking through that site, the camera picks up your movement and begins to follow you. And it also shows what it is seeing. It's actually not recording it, but it is surveying the area. So it rotates and follows people around that space. And of course, San Jose is really a huge center for technology. And this is one of a number of pieces in that airport that capitalizes on that. This is called Waterline. It is at the San Diego County Operations Center in Kearny Mesa. There are 4 office buildings that are identical, and each one was the entry 2-story lobby was the location for a number of artworks that would help distinguish that particular building from others. The county developed a collection on the campus, so it's a great place to go and walk around and take a self-guided tour. This is by a team called Ball Nogus Studio, and what they did is it's kind of fascinating. They developed this model on a very, very sophisticated computer program, and then they hand fabricated it. There are 17,000 individual segments of the stainless steel ball chain, and there are over 10 miles of that and length of the ball chain. They actually hand painted the 7 colors that are represented, and there are over 2,500 overlapping curves, which are, you know, the catenaries. And one thing that was important in this space is that the artwork have a strong presence both at ground level, and then what you see on the right is you can see that there's also a second floor. And as you move through that space, it completely transforms in terms of color, shapes, patterns. It's again something that the space would be entirely different had the artist not created something like this. And this is a piece of Anne Mudge's, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This is on a much larger scale than she has worked, and it is in the building in which you get your building permits. And again, it is really makes a significant difference in the way people use that space. And it is, there are 6 of these that are suspended. And again, you can see the view from above and below. I'm sorry, there are actually 7 pieces, and it's all in Anne style, hand woven wire that she stretches across that steel framework. And it really, the other thing that you undoubtedly know about her work is that light and shadow play a very, very important part in it. So these projects are visible when you're walking outside, you know, in the daytime, and they are also visible at night in terms of how they are lit. This is a really, I think, intriguing project that is in Jerusalem. It's in an area that was really depressed and industrial, and the intent was to try to do something to enliven it and create, you know, bring some level of humanity to it. And it also is split by this, the road is divided by this train that goes through the middle of it. And they wanted to try to stitch that together. So what was created are these 4 gigantic flowers that inflate separately, and they react to movement. So if you are looking for shade, if you simply walk under it, it inflates, and it stays inflated until you walk away. The other thing is that the movement of the train also causes these flowers to inflate. So if you're you know, anxious about making the train on time, this also is an indicator of when the tram is approaching. So it's animated, it's fun, it's functional, and it really does help to highlight and make this a little bit more of a humane, livable space. Oops, sorry. Yeah. This is the Vermont Street Pedestrian Bridge, done by Stone, Paper, Scissors. It was one of the first projects in which the city involved artists in its capital projects. This bridge was not intended to be anything but that. And the artists created, this is for pedestrians and for bicycles. And it's over a canyon, over the 163. And it was important to really, you know, be part of that environment and not feel like you are just heading down a tunnel. And to accomplish that, they created 28 individual laser cut panels that are backed by a blue plexiglass. And there are all kinds of quotes from luminaries, from, you know, Dr. Seuss to Martin Luther King. The other thing that they did that really is subtle but makes a difference if you are on this bridge, it joins Uptown with University Heights. So it goes from a kind of postmodern architecture into a traditional craftsman. So on the concrete, they sandblasted patterns that are more geometric on the uptown side, and then transition into something more organic as you get to the University Heights neighborhood. And along the edges are also definitions and statements that have to do with bridge, whether it's this kind of bridge or the bridge of your nose. And all of the quotes also on the panels have to do with walking and moving across that kind of a space. Sorry, I keep doing that. Sorry. Okay. This is another kind of a pedestrian bridge that was actually designed by an artist in tandem with the engineers. It is Rattlesnake Bridge in Tucson, and it is intended to be a representation of a Western diamondback. And clearly in the desert, there are many, many snakes. It is, in the interior, it is 11 feet wide. It is 280 feet long, and it is a bike and pedestrian bridge. And in this, where you see the rattles on the rattlesnake tail, it actually does rattle. So there's a sound, when you get to that point where you start realizing as you leave the bridge that there is, in fact, that the snake is rattling. This is the rental car facility at the San Jose airport. It clearly is, waving a welcome to the people who are coming and going, and it is highly, highly visible. And again, this would have been quite a stark building had the artist not been involved. What's also incredible is that the fact that the artist could be involved at the very inception of the design made this completely integrated and very inexpensive, because he capitalized on the materials that had to be there anyway. So there are 2 layers of architectural metal, fabric. One, of course, is there, as a barrier for, the parking garage itself. And the other is really the canvas. And what you see in the upper right-hand corner is this sort of pixelated white plastic inserts that form those images. And the artist actually went around the community and took pictures of people's hands. So that is what is represented in this artwork. I keep doing that. There are a number of ways that artists have become involved in really enhancing, functional components and giving it a whole new personality. And again, these are all unique to the particular location. This is a courthouse in Denver that was, going to have just a plain glass, and the artist said, hey, or instead of either a mural or plain glass, let's think about the weather pattern, which is there's a lot of sky in Colorado and a lot of amazing sky. So the artist used, and you can see there are actually 12,500 glass tubes that push like a cloud in these metal frames, and they're completely weather resistant. And as the light moves, the clouds move, both from the inside and the outside. This is kind of a fun and very simple way of personalizing what would have been just another concrete walkway. This joins a residential neighborhood in Chicago with one of their metro stations. And it's there are 300 square feet of this marble mosaic that is an image of a carpet that would be, familiar to a number of the ethnic communities that live in the neighborhood surrounding this facility. This is at the Sacramento airport. The art is so clever. The artist, this is a 50-mile aerial view of the Sacramento River Valley. And it is made out of the same sort of industrial carpet that would have to be there anyway. And there are two of them, so that when this one needs to be pulled up and cleaned, the other goes in its place. And there's nothing precious about it. It's absolutely intended to function, as a industrial carpet, and it absolutely, helps that people as they move from one end. It makes it a little more pleasant journey from one end of a terminal to the next. Also, playground equipment. This is Tom Otterness right in New York, in a residential area in New York City, and again, this becomes so much more fun for the kids and the parents. And the artist worked closely, of course, with safety engineers to make sure that this was kid-friendly. It's also actually in the shade so that it does not overheat. But again, it is so definitive for that neighborhood as opposed to ordering out of a catalog. And this is called domestic seating. These are all cast bronze. The artist was doing a play on how people tend to leave used furniture out on the street. And this is in a neighborhood where near a bus stop, and sort of replaces what most people might think of as sitting on the stoop. What's kind of fun is that the artist did a casting call and asked people to donate for used furniture, which he literally cast into these, and they're comfortable. They are actually not hard to sit on. This is a project that further illustrates how you can make a neighborhood a little more distinctive and more intimate. This is in Fairfield, California. This was actually a temporary project, but these are 8 feet tall, painted representations of actual people in the community. And it is on a highway, and it kind of welcomes people, everyday people, into this community. And it is a very busy thoroughfare, and in the 3 months that it was installed, there were close to 10 million people who saw it as they drove by. This is a pretty innovative, fun, interactive artwork. This is in a well-used alley in downtown Pittsburgh. It's called Cell Phone Disco. And there are 2,000 individually controlled LED lights in this piece. When you carry your cell phone, even if you're not on it, but the phone is on, it transmits these radio waves. And those radio waves communicate with the LEDs and create some movement. But the minute you receive a call or you make a call, that imagery begins to shift. So it's really mesmerizing, and it helps that area feel even a little safer by the light that it projects, but it also is something that is certainly relevant today in our use of a cell phone, but it gives you another way to look at that. Also, we have a lot of construction fences throughout the world. And this was the solution or approach to trying to mitigate the construction in the downtown area of Denver, or near the downtown area. So you probably are aware of yarn bombings. This was actually sanctioned. And the Ladies Fancy Work Society created this garden-like environment that's attached directly to the wall and to the fence. And then what you can see, they collaborated with a sound artist, Jim Green, and you can see in this image on the left the sound boxes that are in place. And what Jim did is he had these positive affirmations that would be heard based on the movement of people in front of it. So it was motion, detected motion, and people would just walk by in a fairly nonchalant way, and all of a sudden they'd hear someone calling out, "Wow, you look great today. I love your smile. Oh, what a great outfit you have on today." And it just really created this incredible, uplifting, fun experience for the passersby. This is also a really wonderful, these are a series of temporary projects where artists have really reimagined, how we experience space. This is in San Francisco, and this actually is the world's first pedal-powered public park. What they did is they created these, bicycle-driven parcels of park in this very urban environment, and they would pedal them to an area that they really just wanted to relax and enjoy, whether the waterfront or some other, area in town. And the mechanisms would collapse into it, and the pieces would fit together. So they actually moved and had essentially a mobile park in which they could relax and enjoy their somewhat beach experience or waterfront experience. This is a project called the Red Ball Project that repeated itself in many forms throughout the world and in cities. This is, an enormous inflated red ball that the artist inserted in all kinds of unexpected places in the environment that really, makes you think about, and see areas that you might encounter every day, but now you're paying attention to them in a very different way. Many of you may be aware of the projects at the Fourth Plinth in Trafalgar Square in London. It initially, like 150 years, 180 years ago, was intended to actually hold an equestrian statue of William IV, but amazing, some things never changed. That plinth remained bare because there were insufficient funds. After that 150 time period in 1998, they finally figured out how to address that, and it now is a site for ongoing changing exhibitions over the years. And so you can see, the ways in which artists have defined and redefined that space. And again, it animates a space in a very historical context that becomes a destination on its own, but also a place where people want to go to see what happens to be on the plinth at the time. Social practice is a very important and form of public art in which the artists are focused on what they on social issues and social justice. And this is a project in Phoenix in a vacant area of an area between buildings that was vacant and pretty sterile and the artist wanted to draw attention to the need to you know, animate it and elevate it. And so what she did is she put out an open invitation to artists who work in textile, knitting, crocheting. She had created a sort of pixelated version of these desert wildflowers. And there were over 300 artists who each contributed one of the squares that then comprised this huge textile. When the project was completed and had been installed, and it was time to dismantle it, each of these separate contributions are actually the size of a blanket, and they were all donated to local homeless shelters for distribution to the homeless. And here you can see how it came together. This is a performance that was inspired by Henry Box Brown. He was a slave who literally put himself into a crate and mailed himself from Richmond, Virginia to freedom in Philadelphia in 1849. The artist applied these forever stamps to his body. This actually was in Philadelphia, and he walked through the city into a post office, walked up to a clerk and said he wanted to be mailed. He then, as part of his performance, systematically began removing the stamps, which was essentially an act of liberation. This is a project by Rafael Lozano Hemmer, also in Philadelphia, where every night for 3 weeks there was this huge light formation that was visible from 10 miles away, and you can even see that these seats are inflatable and were put in place over those 3 weeks for the very purpose of being able to experience these changing lights. The lights were controlled by human voice. There was a website where you could call and leave a message. And based on the volume of your voice, the speed of your message, the length of it, it affected the way the lights projected. And there were 24 of these robotic searchlights that were connected to this stream. And what was pretty remarkable is that it turned out that there were 63,000 people who visited this website from 92 countries, and there were 6,000 messages in over 20 languages. This was in Middlebury, Vermont, and these are actually 8-inch figures made of ice. And there are 400 of them at Middlebury College. The artist distributed them in a public kind of open house in the fall, and invited people to place them wherever they wanted, on these stairs. So everyone from kids to retirees to students, to other members of the community participated. And then over the next few hours, as the sun faded, very deliberately, these figures melted. And it really, was a statement about climate change that allowed you to spend some time and contemplate it. So the last project I wanted to show you is what's called the Champion Flock of Weed Eaters. This was done in San Jose in the front lawn of a transit station to really get people to think about the stewardship of land in urban spaces. So the artist created all these miniature plywood baby sheep, and then the mother sheep is about 4 feet tall, and she is inside the very green barn. And every morning a shepherd would come and open the barn door and let the sheep out on to graze, on the lawn. And the green balls, which were stored obviously inside the barn, also were the food. And then people were invited to take a sheep for the day. And what they were asked to do was to photograph their pet, their sheep, in the environment in which they were companions. And they posted it online. And then the mother sheep also had a monitor installed inside her so she could keep an eye on her babies. So again, this was, something that, invited people to connect with something that they never imagined would be art, to feel that they had a connection, to elevate their understanding of how art does impact our environment and how artists, really do contribute to their quality of life. I wanted to end with an invitation to let people know about this remarkable scholarship fund that Tom helped to create in tribute and celebration of Larry. It is part of the VAPA Foundation, and it provides assistance to graduating seniors in the public school system. And they are, as you can see, awarded to students based on their commitment to artistic excellence and community engagement, which is what Larry represented and mentored and encouraged here in San Diego. So whether you are so inclined or there are people that this is another way to celebrate our great friend. And I will turn this now over to David. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you so much. Let's see. I'm going to just add myself to this, and let's see. You can stop sharing, actually, Gail, if that's.
You don't want to see.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, stop share. Okay, here we go.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so Gail, we've had a few questions.
Okay.
Generally, people are loved seeing the range and variety of ways public art falls into the public realm. This is great. One question that came up was, how do we find public art in San Diego? Is there a guide? Is there a source? Does someone keep track of that?
The good news is that there are many actually very vital organizations, municipal organizations in San Diego. And to my knowledge, there is not a central source, but you can go to these various websites, and I know that each one of them has a listing, that shows you the artwork, self-guided tours. So the City of San Diego, Commission for Arts and Culture, the Port of San Diego, the Lindbergh Field Airport has a really important program, and the County of San Diego. And then there are communities in North County as well, the individual cities, Oceanside, Del Mar, that also have public art. So those are varied and sundry options for you.
Right. Great. Thank you. And actually, you've addressed one of the other questions about websites. That's terrific. it's the kind of thing, public art is something that for me, I always am on the lookout for when I'm in some new place. And it's always interesting to see what even just graffiti kinds of art,
Mhm.
how they reflect the community that people live in. Absolutely. Um, let's see. It was interesting to hear about how artists combine functional elements into their art and for different reasons. Are there some challenges that come with that, or um, what kind of?
There are challenges inherent in any public art project because whatever is created, whether functional or not, it has to meet all kinds of practical considerations. So clearly, if it's functional, it needs to function. It also, all public art needs to be engineered by a licensed engineer that needs to go through the same process of building would in terms of the review of how it will be fabricated and how it will be installed. It also needs to be absolutely safe, and it needs to be easy to maintain. So an element of all contracts with artists is providing maintenance manual that includes all the specifications in terms of how it's built, how it's installed, the material specs. So yes, there's a little different consideration for something functional, but it is not entirely unique from any public artwork that might be developed.
Great. Let's see. There's another one here. Is there any public art installation project in San Diego that's happening now that you'd want to point out?
My involvement locally has been predominantly with the County of San Diego. I absolutely, again, encourage you. I do know that the city has ongoing projects. I know that at the port and the airport do. The most recent county project, and these are all open to the public. So, go take a look at Perry's paintings in the North Park Probation Center, but one that is in process actually is the Lakeside Library, the county library, and the artists that we're working with are John Hogan for a project that's in the Poets Patio, and then the team of Bhavna Mehta and Lynn Susselts for an artwork on the exterior. So I'm not the best source for all other projects, but there are really great resources for you out there.
Right. One question I have in my mind is, it's one thing to sort of go through the process of funding the creation of a work, but there must be some cost associated with maintaining that work. And is that just another line in the budget? Where does that funding come from?
Spoken like a true museum. For a very thoughtful question. That is a big issue. That's why the idea of being able to maintain something is really fundamental to the creation of it. And it wasn't something historically that was funded. And that's why actually a number of the percent for art amounts has been increased to 2%. So just like you do for building maintenance, there needs to be a set aside within the budget of that program for ongoing maintenance, and especially for maintenance if something is damaged and needs repair.
Right.
So it is something that needs to be handled proactively, because otherwise, clearly, the artwork could deteriorate to a point where it is of no value anymore, intrinsically or otherwise.
Right. One thing I'm conscious of is one of the reasons I'm in San Diego is I came to do a postdoc at the Scripps Research Institute. And one of the reasons I chose it, honestly, was the artwork that was in the common areas where I knew I was going to be spending almost my entire life at that point, day and night. and just because of the atmosphere that that creates. But I never had a way of telling anyone or giving feedback to people in some fashion about how important that actually was to me. How do we do that as the public? How do we let people know for instance, the furniture in San Francisco on the street, that's an amazing thing that you might experience. How do we give feedback to people? Who should we give that feedback to?
I think that if you are already predisposed to art and public art, it's important to, be vocal about it, to, catch people doing things right, not just catching them and, talking about things that are, haven't gone as well as you would like to have seen them.
Right.
So it's always great to put into writing in an email something to, whether it's the policymakers and politicians or the members of the board of any of these organizations, and to make reference to these artworks when the opportunity presents itself. Right. One of the things and one of the greatest satisfactions for me throughout my career has been, experiencing and witnessing the evolution of someone who is not at all predisposed to art, to having the experience of working with an artist and seeing the work in place and realizing what a difference it makes. And those are the people who very often become the greatest advocates, because they tell people. I had as an anecdote, I was fortunate enough to have been selected to put the collection together at the County Operations Center, and among the artworks there is a large exterior sculpture that is, from a distance, appears to be just a figure of a man, kind of, considerate holding his head, and it is three-dimensional, but it's made out of a single huge sheet of steel. It is comprised of literally hundreds of smaller figures that you can't really see until you get closer to it. And that's the other thing that I would say is a quality of and a consideration in creating public art, that it's something that holds your attention, from a distance and continues to engage you as you get closer to it. And that it's also something that if you are a repeat visitor, that you're always in a position to find something new in it. So in this case, the story is that shortly after it had been installed, I was on the campus photographing it. And I was pretty low profile. And there was a woman who was in a landscape jumpsuit as a maintenance employee. And she came bounding over the landscape, ran over to me and said, in case you didn't know, I wanted to point out that you need to get closer to it, because it's made of it has all these smaller figures in it. And she was telling me how she posted it on Facebook, and she really encouraged me to get closer. And I looked at her and I just said, thank you, I will definitely take a closer look. And that is what's remarkable, when there is that sense of ownership and pride of place that you are discovering, and you are excited about something that has not been in your realm on a regular basis.
Right. I think that's true. That makes so much sense, doesn't it? Peter Fink has said, come and see the latest public art piece in San Diego buses. They're celebrating the Freedom Riders, opening today at Broadyard Broadway. Yeah, Broadyard downtown, organized with the Afro-American Art Museum, San Diego. That's great. Thank you. We'll definitely get to that. And Tom also said, if you're in New Orleans, definitely take some time to spend a couple of hours at Crescent Park, a 1.4-mile linear park along the Mississippi River levee. And you can send a website. That's terrific. Thank you for that. You know, Gail, we were talking separately about what kinds of artists tend to create the kinds of works you're talking about that are innovative and engaging. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share around that?
Of course, that's a good question. I, for years, public art and the effort to make it as integrated as possible into a hardscape or landscape was a very important gesture in being more inclusive. It served a very important purpose, but it also, in my opinion, produced a number of artworks that began, or integration of works that began to look very similar from one community to another. And I started thinking about, how do we refresh that and begin to elevate it as art? And that's something that is, in my opinion, so important that any artist who is involved in a public art project never, ever feel that they need to cater to the lowest common denominator or feel that, and I think it's a misnomer anyway, because I think that people are just looking for the kind of leadership that exposes them to something they haven't seen before. So if someone says, I would like, a member, in a community group says, I like what they did down the street and that's what I want. What I hear is you want something that is unique and distinctive. So what can we do? It's not a replication of what someone else has done, because then it's neither relevant or particularly inventive. So I have a tendency to seek out, artists who have not done public art. And Perry Vasquez is a perfect example. And John Hogan, and people who have such extraordinary talent, whose work may have predominantly been in galleries or museums, but they haven't had either the opportunity or comfort in working in the public sector. And it's not easy. I mean, the myriad of personalities and requirements and expectations all need to be sort of negotiated, and that's generally the role of someone who runs a public art program or a consultant, is to really serve as that liaison. And so the artists, artists who can bring a fresh perspective and haven't developed, a public art vocabulary because they think it's, will be safe, is legitimate. But I would say, for my purposes, I am much more interested in, more of the unknown, and to see how an artist will respond to a site based on their own work, with the understanding that the integrity of the work is really paramount.
Right. Well, that's great. Just one quick question is the county center collection, operations center collection, open to the public?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can actually, David, send you the digital version of the newest brochure, so that people have access to it. It exists also in physical form, but it was published right in the middle of the pandemic, so it hasn't really had wide distribution. The campus is 42 acres. It's very doable. I mean, not all the buildings are spread throughout, but there are 25 artists who are represented. There are pieces that were purchased and two-dimensional artwork. And there's also a lot of three-dimensional artwork. Artist Jay Johnson in every single building. And this is a good example, again, of what you were talking about before. When the county, this campus was built in the 60s, and it was very cool, but unsafe and inaccessible. So they needed to pretty systematically replace the buildings that were there. They also were committed to consolidating city departments and centralizing them. So knowing that the buildings were going to be demolished, the county, was concerned about what might happen to artifacts that had been collected by department department. And they initially said to me that they really wanted just to hire a museum exhibition display person to create some standardized displays that could hold these objects. And they were tremendously receptive, but I said, hey, we're using public art money. We need to hire an artist, and an artist who will look at things a little differently. So Jay Johnson, was selected, and he, on every single floor in these buildings, he has what is called an artifact display. And he went through every building, talked to all the staff, and in these displays are things that range from a reproduction of an original signature of Abraham Lincoln that the county was not aware they owned. He had a public historian went through piles of files and came upon this land deed. So it's from a signature of Abraham Lincoln to the hairball of a wild boar. So it's fascinating, and it has his sense of humor in it. It is a very unconventional way of displaying things. So yes, the simple answer is the county is open, I think, from like 8 in the morning till probably 5:30 or 6. And you can just go on the campus and wander around. They also have a wonderful cafe so that you can also, have a picnic or take a break while you're touring the collection.
Great. I suppose as our county operations center, we have some stake in that. So that sounds like a great way to spend an afternoon or lunch. So maybe one sort of broad final question. Actually, before I do that, there are some really good comments here about events that are coming up and websites. Know that you can save your chat if you look at the very bottom of the chat window, there are the 3 little dots. Under that, you can say save chat, and it will save that whole thing as a text file, including the web addresses that are there. So you don't have to struggle to write those things down. So I'll go back to one sort of broad final question is, as someone coming from your background, how do museums participate in these activities, and what can we do as a museum to support them, art in the public realm?
Yeah. That's an important consideration, and it's something more and more and more that both museums and public entities are engaging in, and that's finding real ways to collaborate, to raise the profile of what is happening both inside and outside the museum, and where the museums become part of the way that museums become part of the community, and a way that the community can really experience phenomenal artwork. When an artist is involved with a commission, a museum is a fabulous venue for hosting a brown bag lunch, or where the artist can present their past work, where lectures can take place. There are also opportunities for if there's a small or space in which that artist could have a small exhibition of their work that people can see as during the time period the artist is working. There are ways to also, create a small tour or site visit where museum folks can go and tour a collection or see the artist actually installing. And any time that we have, I think for all of us who are so passionate and obsessed with the arts, any time that we can personalize an interaction with that artist, not only raises our level of understanding, but that personal connection provides some real incentive for seeing what the artist creates and for being able to say, hey, I met that artist. And it really does, like anything, that personal connection is, what touches us. And I think with all the art that I showed you and the art that you have at the museum, in the end, it really isn't the intrinsic value of the materials or the market. Whether it's temporary or permanent, it really is the memory it creates for us and how that affects us, on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Well, Gail, thank you so much. You've been a wonderful speaker today, and it's wonderful to honor Larry Baza in this way. It's a real privilege for all of us. And so with that,
David, can I just make one plug
Yes.
for an event next Friday? The museum is hosting the Expressions of Pride event on the steps in front of the museum from 4 to 7 p.m. And that's also, by the way, being dedicated in honor of Larry Baza. But it will be a series of performances by different groups, Disco Riot and a number of others. There's also going to be a lot of art making going on. So I put in the chat the link to that on our museum's website. So I invite all of you to check that out.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I think with that, we'll say thank you very much to Gail and all of you who joined us today. We'll see you next fall in September for the next season of